There are crimes so vast in their cruelty that language itself begins to fail. Not because words do not exist, but because the human mind resists standing too close to what was done. This is one of those stories. It did not begin with a scream. It did not begin with blood. It began with an ordinary evening, a bicycle moving through winter air, and a society that would later insist it saw nothing at all. What follows is not a tale of monsters hiding in shadows. It is the story of doors that stayed closed, voices that went quiet, and a girl who disappeared, not from the world, but from its conscience. Chapter I. An ordinary life, carefully built. She lived in a quiet prefecture north of the capital, the sort of place where evenings fell gently, where routine was a comfort rather than a prison. She was young, disciplined, unremarkable in the way goodness often is. A student by day, a factory worker by evening. She saved patiently for a graduation trip, a small promise of freedom after years of responsibility. Her future was already outlined, employment secured, family proud, no scandals, no rebellion. She did not drink, she did not smoke, she did not disappear into risky places. She was, by every measurable standard, safe. And yet, safety is often an illusion created by repetition. We believe tomorrow will resemble today. We trust the roads we travel daily. That belief would cost her everything. Chapter 2. The first lie among her peers was a boy known not for kindness, but for fear. His reputation arrived before him. Connections whispered rather than confirmed. A young man who mistook intimidation for authority. He desired her when she refused him, plainly, without cruelty. Something inside him fractured. Rejection to him was not a boundary. It was humiliation. And humiliation demanded correction. The plan was simple, elegant even in its deception. Someone would attack, someone else would rescue, trust would be manufactured, and gratitude would become leverage. The oldest trick in the history of predation, manufactured safety. Chapter 3. The night the road changed, the air was cold. Her bicycle cut through the evening as it always had. Then chaos, brief and violent. A fall, a voice, a familiar face stepping forward, playing the role written for him. He appeared protective, concerned, reliable. Fear blurs judgment, and fear had already done its work. She accepted the escort. That decision, so small, so human, would end her life long before her heart stopped beating. Chapter 4. The door that closed. He did not take her home. He took her somewhere forgotten, an empty structure, concrete walls that absorbed sound, a place where no one asked questions because no one expected answers. What happened inside cannot be narrated directly, not because it is unknown, but because describing it would serve the perpetrators more than the victim. What matters is this: her autonomy was taken, her trust was weaponized, and her fear was treated as entertainment. When others arrived, it became clear this was not improvisation. This was practice. And in that moment, the decision was made, silently, without ceremony, that she would not be allowed to leave. Chapter V. When a crime becomes a system, mourning did not bring release. Instead, threats did. Names were spoken. Addresses were recited. Family members transformed into hostages without knowing it. She was moved into a home, not abandoned, not hidden, but occupied. Parents lived there. Siblings passed through rooms. Ordinary domestic life continued, rearranged around an unspoken truth. At first, there was an attempt at normalcy, a lie presented to the outside world, a narrative that required effort, but effort faded. No one was coming, and so restraint vanished. Days lost their meaning. She became an object, passed, discussed, displayed, not hidden, but normalized. Others were told, some came, some watched, some laughed. What is most chilling is not what was done, but how many people knew. Not one alarm was raised, not one door was forced open, not one voice carried far enough. The cruelty escalated, not because it needed to, but because boredom demanded novelty. Pain became routine. Routine became sport. And still no one came. Chapter 7. The adults who looked away. There were adults in that house. They heard movement. They saw injuries. They understood enough. But fear is contagious, and self-preservation is persuasive. They chose silence, not because they believed it was right, but because they believed it was safer. This is where evil thrives most comfortably, not in rage, but in calculation. Chapter the 8th. The call that almost changed everything. At one point, weakened, injured, barely able to stand, she moved toward a telephone. Every step was a rebellion. A call was placed. A line opened. For a moment, just a moment, history hesitated. Then a hand reached out. A voice replaced hers. A lie was delivered calmly. The opportunity vanished, and the punishment for hope was severe. Chapter X. A body that could no longer protest as weeks passed. Her condition worsened, movement became difficult, speech became faint. Her body, overwhelmed, began to shut down in pieces. This was no longer captivity. It was a prolonged erasure. She stopped asking to be saved. She asked only for the end. That request, too, was denied. Chapter X. New Year, old silence. On the first day of the year, she woke alone. No celebration, no resolution, only pain and the slow understanding that survival was no longer possible. 3 days later, the violence peaked, not in desperation, but in irritation, and after that, there was stillness. Chapter She Disposal. Panic replaced cruelty. What had been treated as entertainment became evidence. The solution was mechanical, cold, efficient. A container, concrete. A construction site where no one would think to look. The city swallowed the truth, and for a time, it worked. Chapter 12. A confession by accident. The truth emerged, not through conscience, but through confusion. Another crime, another interrogation. One man spoke too freely, believing the worst was already known. It wasn't. But now it was unavoidable. Chapter Zai. What was found when the container was opened. The investigators did not speak. They did not need to. Identification required science, not recognition. The family was told everything. The mother collapsed. The father aged decades in days. A home that once planned celebrations now learned vocabulary no parent should know. Chapter the 14th. The courtroom. The perpetrators showed little emotion. Details were read aloud. People fainted. The law, however, spoke softly. Charges were reduced. Language was softened. Sentences were measured not against suffering, but against age. The system chose procedure over justice. Courtrooms are built to feel neutral. Wood, benches, raised platforms. Symbols of order meant to reassure the public that chaos can be contained. But neutrality can also be a disguise. As proceedings unfolded, a curious transformation took place. What had occurred was no longer described as annihilation, but as escalation. Not murder, but consequence. Not intention, but outcome. Words were softened. Definitions narrowed. The law did not ask what was done. It asked how old the perpetrators were when they did it. And in that distinction, justice began to evaporate. Chapter the 16th. Youth as a shield. The defense leaned heavily on one concept: youth. They were young, they were misguided, they were salvageable. Rehabilitation, the court argued, was preferable to punishment. But no one explained how rehabilitation applied to cruelty that had required coordination, patience, and prolonged intent. No one explained how youth negated repetition, and no one explained why the victim's youth mattered less than the perpetrator's. Chapter 17. A nation listens, then shouts when the sentences were announced. Disbelief spread faster than grief ever had. Protests formed. Petitions circulated. Editorials abandoned restraint. People asked questions the law could not answer. How does a system weigh pain? How many days of suffering equal a year of prison? At what point does mercy become complicity? The court adjusted slightly. A few sentences were extended. A few appeals were denied. But the foundation remained untouched. The punishment did not match the crime. Chapter the 18th. The names that would not stay buried legally. Anonymity was granted. Morally, the public refused. Journalists investigated what the court had hidden. Names surfaced. Faces were remembered. The justification was blunt. Those who erase another human being do not deserve to vanish themselves. It was an act of defiance, not against the law, but against silence. And no one protested that decision. Chapter 6. Time served. Memory, unserved years passed. Cells opened. Gates unlocked. One by one, the perpetrators returned to the world that had once failed to stop them. Some changed their names. Some moved cities. Some attempted normalcy. But normalcy did not erase history. Chapter 20. The illusion of rehabilitation. One of them attempted reinvention, marriage, a child. The performance of stability. It did not last. Violence, once normalized, does not evaporate. It waits. Another returned to crime, less organized, less patient, but no less dangerous. The system, which had argued for redemption, now confronted a familiar outcome. While the perpetrators re-entered society, the family remained suspended in time. The house they lived in became quieter. Celebrations were endured, not enjoyed. A mother collapsed under the weight of knowing. A father carried guilt that had no origin in truth, only in grief. They were not offered closure, only documentation. Chapter 22. The grave that was disturbed. There are acts so cruel they defy rational explanation. One of the perpetrators' families vandalized the grave. The justification was staggering. Blame redirected toward the victim. It was not enough that life had been taken. Memory too was assaulted. This was not denial, it was inversion. Chapter 23. Society's quiet complicity. This case is often described as an anomaly. It is not, it required. Neighbors who did not ask questions, adults who chose fear over responsibility. Police who accepted reassurance without verification, laws that valued procedure over consequence. The crime was not hidden, it was ignored. Chapter 24. The police who knocked once to officers arrived at the house once. They were told nothing was wrong. They believed it. No warrant, no search, no follow-up. This moment haunts the case more than any other, because it proves something terrifying. Sometimes, rescue is one decision away. Chapter 25. Evidence without endings. Investigators later uncovered traces linking additional individuals. Some were charged, some were not. Time diluted urgency. Public outrage moved on. Justice, once delayed, became optional. Chapter 26. What the case became. The story entered textbooks, academic discussions, legal reforms. But reforms are cold comfort. They do not resurrect. They do not console. They merely acknowledge that something went terribly wrong. Chapter 27. The question that will not fade. Every retelling invites the same question. Why didn't someone stop it? The answer is not simple, but it is uncomfortable. Because stopping it required courage, accountability, discomfort, and too many people chose convenience. Chapter 28. What remains there is no moral lesson neat enough to conclude this story, only truths. That evil does not always announce itself, that systems fail quietly, that silence is often louder than screams, and that remembrance, however painful, is the final act of resistance. Final reflection, a debt unpaid. This was not only a crime against one person, it was a crime against responsibility, against empathy, against the idea that society exists to protect the vulnerable, and that debt remains unpaid. Closing words. We tell this story not to sensationalize, but to refuse erasure, not to glorify darkness, but to illuminate failure, because forgetting is easy, and forgetting is dangerous.